This is Kat with The Rules Still Apply. Excited to have my second episode. My second guest, not second best, but second guest, Steve Richard here. He's a co-founder of Exec Vision, Vorsight. Steve is my first sales hero. I already admitted my sales crush to him before we got started here today, guys. But 45 minutes before coming to a conference to hang out with all you insurance agents, my boss sent me one of Steve's pretty old now blog posts about get your shit together essentially for a trade show. And I've lived and died by those rules. You guys have seen me there and spent time with me and asked me why I'm in heels and standing all day. This is the reason. Steve, follow it up. What do you talk to guys about being on their game?
Yeah. You know, that came from Kat. The funny thing about that is I'm a business owner and have been since I was in my mid-20s. So in the beginning of the article, I described that like sometimes I'm the hunter, you know, that's trying to get the people to talk to me, and sometimes I'm the prey.
Yeah.
And as a result, I could, you know, see both perspectives. And I started to have these pet peeves that would develop. Like I'd see these people that spend all this money in this booth, and everyone would be sitting behind the booth on their computers doing their email. And I'm like, why would you do that? You could do that whenever, or when you eat at the booth, or those kinds of things. So those were the first like these are no-nos. But then it was the way people would have conversations. So I'd walk up to a booth, and a lot of times I'd walk up and people would just immediately say, you know, we are a blah, blah, blah. They would just basically pitch and try to hand me whatever flyer they had or tchotchke or whatever. And I'm kind of like, you know, what is this all? So instead you had to reverse it, flip it around and make it so it was about them. What brought you here today? Who's your favorite speaker and why? What have you gotten out of the conference so far? Tell me about your business. I'd love to hear more about your business. And then inevitably they would say, well, the thing that's really important to us, or the thing we're struggling with, or our biggest challenge, and you'd hear the explicit need. So that was the article, and we can put it in the show notes for folks.
Absolutely will do that, because at this point it's comical. I have now, as my career's progressed, obviously traveled with some early co-founders at different insurtech startups and stuff. And the amount of times that I will go grab a water and they're left in charge of the booth, and I come back and there's snacks all over the table, and like they have like a beer in hand already, and it's like me running across the room, what are you doing? Like just the whole 9 yards. So yeah, that'll provide some context to why I'm a loon.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, this is Steve's fault, guys. The thing I think that transitions from, though, that I have watched, you have shared a lot of feedback for virtual selling, a lot of just sales tip of the day. He's an awesome follow on LinkedIn, guys, if you are using your LinkedIn. But transitioning from just even the trade show mentality to the constant mentality of being a salesperson. And you talked about commitment and being present, a conviction to like what you're doing, and being sincere. And I think that's what I wanted to try to help the insurance agents with today, because what I'm bringing to them is the rules still apply. When we compare an insurance agency's sales process to the sales processes that consumers are constantly exposed to, we can't just lean in on this is the way things have been done. And we're moving ourselves in a typical way into areas that we're comfortable with, all of the discomfort from COVID, the election, like you just name it. This hasn't been a really fun year. And people are leaning back into those practices that are a little residual and aren't really helping them. So I wanted to get your take on conviction, commitment, that authenticity, and how people can showcase that during their sales process.
Yeah, that's a good one. So, and there's several things I struggle with here. You know, what personally, you know, one of the things I struggle with is the being fully present, especially on internal meetings. I do a pretty good job of it if I'm in a sales call or if I'm talking to a customer. I mean, I think it's just in my DNA that I just lock right in. But internal meetings, a lot of times I find myself just being like, I just want to get through my Slacks and my emails so that I don't have to deal with them later. So yeah. I'm bad when it comes to that. But I'll tell you that the thing that's I think the most important is there is something to be said for when you're standing in front of someone or when you're sitting in front of someone and when you're fully present there, it's a little bit easier for all of us. You have to almost use your imagination to get to that point, to say that this is the person that matters the most in the world, most than anybody else. And you really fundamentally believe that, and you actually give a dang about what they're saying. You know, in the sales training world, everyone's taught to find pain points. You know, we're going to uncover pain points or or in the insurance businesses, potential risks or goals, objectives. So people are trying to accomplish a goal, avoid a risk, or fix a problem that they have. It's one of those three things. And when the salesperson does that, so frequently salespeople say things like, "Oh, that's cool," or "awesome," or they'll say like, "That's a good thing." No, when you're finding someone's pain or risk, you have to be empathetic with that person and authentic and sincere that, oh boy, if I were you, that seems like a big risk. That would be a big concern of mine. If my children were in that kind of situation, or if I had that home that's on the water that I'm really concerned about flooding and the family heirlooms, all that kind of stuff, you have to bring that real authenticity of being a human being, and it can't be fake, and to be able to almost imagine they're sitting in front of you. So that's kind of the tip from that one that's worked well for me, is you just got to pretend you're with them.
Right. Talk about that even a little bit more, because you mentioned something that I jotted down as we were just going through it, and it was being present internally. And I think that's something that we can save for the end for those that are not producers but are managing producers, and how to show up and coach a sales team and still, even remote, be a great manager, care about their needs, and build that empathy too, that then they can model that empathy into their sales
Well,
process.
heck, do you want to do that now? Why don't we do that now while we're on? Otherwise, we're going to
We
forget.
really love it. We can do it.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some tips for the leaders, for the managers that are non-producers or player coaches.
Mhm.
One is, have your people share their screens when you're in meetings. It's a little trick of the trade. There's no better way to make sure that someone's not multitasking than when they're sharing their screen, because they have to pay attention. And you'll also see, based on where and how they move the mouse, I almost have a window into their brain and how their brain is functioning, and whether or not the synapses are connecting the way they should versus they aren't. And that could be anything from taking a look and inspecting the sales activity metrics, emails they might be sending or working on, looking at your CRM. There's a lot of different things you would be looking at collateral, looking at territory management, a lot of things, list management, a lot of things you could be doing. But there's something to be said for, they share their screen, they're moving the mouse, they're physically more committed. And this is not my opinion. There's a lot of research that's been done on a field called neuro-linguistic programming. And what that is there's a language of the brain. People are auditory, visual, kinesthetic. Funny enough, NLP got a nod in the crazy NXIVM. There's like there was like that cult that was in upstate New York, and they were studying NLP, but that's NLP taken the wrong way. The Vow, that's what it's called, The Vow. And that guy Keith Raniere got put in prison. But anyway, there's something on like HBO.
So if we need somebody to drink the Kool-Aid, we should follow those 3 principles, and then we've essentially turned them into our own sales.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to use it for the purposes of good, not evil. So that's a big one. I'll tell you another big one is call reviews. When you're going to do recorded call reviews. Now, of course, that's what we do with Exec Vision with our technology. A big thing people don't realize is most online meeting tools, Zoom being the preeminent one, when you share your screen, if you hit that button, and hit it right now, there's a little thing that says, a check mark that says share computer sound. And most people just don't know that's there, but that is so great, because then when we're going to do a recorded call review, they can hear it like clearly through their speakers on their side, and you can still have a conversation. So there's all these little kind of tips that I'm seeing for how managers are bringing forward leading by example, and showing being fully present. And a lot of them actually kind of go back to technology, interestingly.
Right. I think that's part of probably over the years too, why insurance agents haven't kept up, is there's been a reluctance in some of it, well earned because of compliance and customer sensitivity and, what data is being shared and such. But there's been a reluctance to use technology to make your job easier and to support your team. Yeah. Now we're thrown into the fire and we have to use it. And we haven't necessarily always kept the silver skills here very shiny. So yeah, I think call coaching being a call out there, having them drive, like you said, I think it also teaches you how familiar and how much they're exploring the platforms that you're using and giving to them as well. Whether it's a CRM, we have agency management systems is what, our big platform is in our space. If you ask somebody to click somewhere that you expect them to use and they struggle to find it, that begins to tell you that they're probably not doing it, certainly when you're not looking.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because here's another part of being a manager and a leader. As a general rule, but I don't always follow this, I try to make a rule that I wouldn't ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And that includes use certain technologies. So I try to practice what I preach. I use them first, kind of vet them out, and then I get somebody else involved. But that's not always the case. I've had multiple examples of rolling out new technologies, two that come to mind recently, where one of them was is a dialing technology, not like an auto dialer, but like a click to call, it automatically logs it in the system of record. And then another one was this technology for identifying what we call 3x3 research. It's a term that I've got. It stands for how do I find 3 key points on the company or contact in 3 minutes of research. You remember it, Kat? That's good. So it's pre-call.
Dave, if you give this away, my own sales team will never get a hold of an insurance again, agent, anyone in the whole ecosystem, without being like, oh, that's why they're doing that. That's where Kat got that.
Nice. Good. I love it. I love it. Consistency. That's what leadership's about, is consistency.
Absolutely.
So 3x3 research. And it's this platform allegedly, I'm not going to name it, was a way to get the 3x3 research much faster than 3 minutes. And it was also going to be higher quality. Well, when I gave it to those reps, I asked them, and they didn't. The funny thing is, they're too sheepish. They don't feel like they've earned the right to tell me the truth. So I have to go back to them and I said, Pete, Matt, this virtual assistant ad in India, is this thing any good? Well, come on, shoot me straight. Tell me the truth. They're like, no, our process is better than this. And then I said, can you share my screen? Can you walk me through it? Can I see what you see? And when I saw it, I was like, they're 100% correct. Stop it, turn it off. You know what I mean? In that case, we don't want to use that kind of, so that's, as a leader, you really need to be able to, ask those questions about all the new processes, methods. The workflow of the agent is so important. The workflow of the producer is so important. And you don't realize how one little tiny thing that you introduce that's different can potentially totally knock that person off their axis, where they don't have that rhythm. They don't have that workflow they had before. So as leaders, we have to be very cognizant, especially when we're not sitting next to them and we can't see them, because you can figure it out if you're there, but virtually it's tough.
Right. I think the other thing too is the more we throw them off their game, the less we can expect them to practice their EQ skills instead of their IQ skills. So the more and more I put pressure on you, Steve, you got to click this button, then you got over here, then you got to go over here. You suddenly start becoming Robo-Man instead of an authentic, empathetic seller, an actual person that shows up to talk to that individual customer.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And it's the right brain, left brain, and all those things. We have to remind ourselves of what's important. I did a webinar called Establishing the New Baseline, where we're going into 2021. We're seeing practices emerging here that are new, innovative, interesting practices. For example, sending video messages on platforms like Vidyard, or sending platform on the other one that I'm about to test out is Drift, has a new video message platform, or Loom, those kinds of things.
A lot of Loom and BombBomb in our space.
Yeah, BombBomb. There's ways people are engaging with prospects now that are completely different than they did before. So this is a chance to try new things.
Absolutely. Let's look then and get it back to the producer, the person who's watching this and says, I need to do what my boss asks me to do. I'm trying to grow my own book of business within my company. What do they do, whether it is virtually, whether it's even on a phone call? Because occasionally we still get some in-person meetings here. We sit halfway across the conference room, we wear our masks, but then we have to follow up. What do you do to build that empathy, or even to show your commitment and that you're actively listening? What are methods that you found, whether it be through both of the companies that you've been at and coaching salespeople, your own salespeople, and then other people's salespeople? How do people begin to use little tricks of the trade, daily activities to show up and be more authentic?
Yeah, I'll give you one real concrete one. The voice of the customer voice. So what I mean by that, Kat, is I'm talking to a lot of other business owners like you. I'm talking to a lot of other seniors like you, whatever that person might be, demographic. And I'm hearing things like blank, 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 and being able to tell those stories of others. So essentially what you're doing as a salesperson, as a producer, is you're removing yourself as a filter or a barrier, if you will. I actually find that most salespeople get in their own way. I mean, when I first started my career, when I was unsuccessful, I was 100% getting in my own way, because I thought, this is not that hard. I can do this. And boy, was I wrong. I was failing miserably. And then finally, by studying what the best people did and then doing those things, that's how I got to be successful. So, we are basically a filter or a lens through which your prospect or your client or your customer sees the world, you better come in there with stories relevant from their peers. That's going to establish your credibility and then make it so that there's another, reason to do something else. Next thing, establish next steps. It's so simple, but scheduling concrete next steps for the next thing that's going to happen and making sure that you're holding that person's hand through the process in an authentic way. That's a real big one. Of course, there's empathy. I did a post yesterday with one of my daily tips of the day. Fascinating TED talk by this guy. I can't remember. He's like UC Berkeley or something. And he puts people in MRI machines. I think it's UC Chico actually. Puts people in MRI machines and they study empathy neurons is what they call them. And what that basically is if you're watching somebody get hurt, you don't physically feel it where they're getting hurt, but the part of the brain that feels that pain does in fact light up. So this is not some like hocus pocus science stuff, bogus stuff, kumbaya. This is legitimately our brains working, and you can measure it. This guy can actually measure it when you put someone in an MRI. So it's real science. So if that's the case, how are you using that innate empathy that's built into you as a person in your sales calls with people? I don't think people go nearly to where they should, because you got to give a damn. I mean, it's like, are you talking to your aunt or your uncle, at a holiday party? Think of it more like that and bring that level of familiarity versus everybody sort of being at arm's length, and how we treat our prospects as just as kind of abstractions,
Right. Something that you mentioned there, and I'm wondering, because like we look at inside sales models and have operated them within our own companies. We see insurance agents beginning to adopt it to compete with a direct to consumer model that's coming out from a lot of the insurance carriers and even some insure techs as well. Do you think there's a bandwidth limit for an actual salesperson to display empathy? Like when we switch to an inside sales model, do we say, if you're going to make 100 calls a day, I kind of expect some diminishing returns around the 80th call, that you're just going to be out of empathy. You're going to feel a little numb. And is that something to be like aware of across a day, a week, an industry, a group of people, and how hard it's hit?
It's interesting you bring up the diminishing marginal return. We see that happen in, I've got this business called Vorsight still, we talked about it, does outsourced appointment setting, where there's a diminishing return after call 120 on any given date. Now this is a ridiculously high calling operation. So yeah, you're completely right. And then like you said, the whole feeling numb and all that kind of stuff. And this is where I'll give you like a thought exercise, more of a thought exercise, to borrow a term from Einstein, who talked about thought exercises. When I was doing the job, let's say I was at month 14, 15, 16 when I first started, when I was in 21, 22 years old. Mm-hmm. And you're, if you're doing that kind of dialing $120 a day,
yeah,
what you do is, rather than it being a name on a list, I would imagine certain things about the individual. I would almost make up these little stories. Oh, look at that, Howard Schultz and blah, blah, blah. I wonder if he looks like Charlie Brown. I mean, it seems so silly, but like that's a way of trying to humanize, or like imagine. Now, I know this is applying stereotypes, and that's all well and fine. Steve Richard, who lives in Arlington, Virginia, what would that be like compared to somebody else? Right. But the idea behind it is that you're trying to humanize this, as opposed to it being a name on a list, and it does change your outcome. It does change your outcome. And frequently a lot of the assumptions that you'd make would be right, or if they weren't right, people would at least say, boy, I appreciate the fact that you at least tried to understand what I might be dealing with or going through right now. Because here's the thing, in the insurance business, all the technology that's come out and everything is all about kind of, more transparency means that people are going to get more information and be able to get decision in insurance, in an easier fashion. It's all about decreasing friction, making it a more efficient market. Making it a more efficient market is great. But ultimately, when it comes time to, like, when push comes to shove, and I've gone through those marketplaces before, I've experienced it. And you know what happens? You have a lot of good information, but then there's going to be people that are going to take it that last mile, that last little bit that happens. And the ones that are, if I get all the robocalls and I sit on the web form, text me, and they don't text me. And when they text me, they don't text me the stuff that I'm looking for, or they don't, hey, look, I hate when people don't text me also, here you go. Why don't you give me a buzz anytime, just not when I'm putting the kids to bed. Like, now I'm dealing with someone that I can really sink my teeth into, that's going to be my advocate through this process, as opposed to it just like, go find on the table the lowest cost, the highest service, because insurance doesn't work like that ultimately.
Right. I think it's funny that you say that. We just finished running a case study across the country that we looked at speed to lead in the insurance space. And we put the default behavior that we requested was please text us as soon as you can. I'm going back to my workday was our fake leads, life as we tested to see if they could do it. We did 150 agencies, the 50 top metropolitan areas, 3 in each one. We had 4 agencies that texted us back.
Yeah.
All the rest, it was an email and we'll be
Yeah.
with you shortly, never with you shortly, called you. And you're like, I could have been in a $1 million meeting of their own. They could have been on the cusp of, like you said, putting your kids to bed. You could have a million things going on in your life. So I think the marriage of technology with empathy and making sure that people are balancing those two is going to be what really puts insurance back into that advocate and advisory role, rather than trying to compete with lowest price, funniest commercial, biggest Super Bowl ad spend, all that stuff that it's flashy and it's, nice to draw attention to the industry, but it doesn't really get the job done.
You buy the way you have to sell the way people buy. It's like sales consulting. When I did a lot of sales consulting 101, you look at someone's sales process and they would have this, first meeting, second meeting, proposal, close. Okay, well, those are all sales activities. What about the buyer? What about the buying activities? What are they doing? What are the phases and the stages they go through? It actually turns out it's business as usual. Everything's hunky dory. Then they go to recognition of need. They realize they have something they want to either fix, accomplish, or avoid. Then after that, they're evaluating options. There is a period called resolution of concerns. That's when risk is the highest. They might make a bad decision. They're kind of waffling. And then finally, implementation. So if you can really understand where the buyer is and how does the buyer want to be sold to and how they want to buy, and then you align the way you sell to that, magical things happen. It really is. And it was the same thing in the mortgage industry. I can remember the last time I went to one of the mortgage sites and filled in my information. A bombardment that I got for the next week was unbelievable. And there was one guy, and that's the one guy that I just called and followed up with a guy about refining this several months later. He and I initially talked. He was like, look, I'll tell you if we don't have the best rate, and I'll tell you where to go if we don't. I'm like, forget this. I don't want to get bombarded again. I'm going to this guy.
Right. Do you think that there's a common mistake, aside from aligning it to what you think your sales process should be rather than the buyers? Do you think there's a mistake that most people make, even a trained salesperson, that we make because we are tired? We are, we're imperfect. We're human. Do you think there's a common thing that like everybody could catch themselves doing 4 out of the 5 days?
Asking questions before you've earned the right to. And this is part of what changing buyer behavior looks like now. So the notion of the discovery call and the 21 questions and essentially interrogating the prospect is not valid unless that's the way the person wants to buy. So I'll give you a little tip. It comes from the guy named Richard Harris that I love. In the beginning of a call, I'll say, hey, Kat, we could do this one of 2 ways. I've got several questions for you, but I'm sure you'd like to have a little bit more context. You probably have just information you want from me. Which would you prefer? Do you want me to give you some context and you get the information, or do you want me to ask you some questions? So you let that be a choose your own adventure. And does the buyer go left? Does the buyer go right? And it's phenomenal because it breaks down all the walls. Because otherwise you're sitting there and guessing. Otherwise you're like, well, I think that they want me to do a little bit of, talk a little bit about the coverage levels for this product first. Well, maybe they don't. I learned from a sales training person that came in, I was supposed to ask questions first and ask discovery questions first. Well, maybe they don't want to answer those questions first. Maybe they just have to get these 3 things off their chest, gather that information, and then they're willing to answer your questions. You see what I mean? And there's so that's one method. Another little trick of the trade, a little tip, is what's called an invitation questions. Kat, would it be okay if I asked you a few questions? So you're asking a question, inviting that person to let you in. And if they say, no, I just want X, then you know what you should do as a salesperson? Give them X, give them the thing that they want at that point, and then flip it around and challenge them. So you give them that quote, you give them that information, give them whatever, and they say, but I'll tell you what, but I gave you that, but at the same time, Kat, now you are blah, 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 you're in this area, you live in Columbus, right? Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm seeing for people like you in Columbus is they have X, Y, or Z. Are you dealing with any of that? Actually, in fact, I am. Well, really, because based on that, you would actually get a much better deal than if you went the way that you were talking about. Oh, really? Tell me more. Right now, all of a sudden, that person's leaning in. So you help align with the buyer the way the buyer wants to be sold to. And then at the same time, you have them think differently about their situation.
So I feel like it's have empathy, know their persona to be prepared, and then match yourself to their journey. And you might have to know your persona up front to direct them, or you might have to know the persona so that, I don't want to say post sale, but maybe post pitch, that you can readjust their mindset. But you're really arming yourself with your empathy and your knowledge first and foremost, and then putting them into a managed captain position that they can decide which route they want to go. And you're the one that's prepared with that empathy,
right.
authenticity, and their persona, knowledge around their industry, and a subject matter expertise to really get them through.
And that, right, that's the last piece you didn't mention, is the insight, the subject matter expertise.
Yeah.
You know, and being able to put that in the right moment. And then again, hey, you know, before I say that's actually the right fit for you, can I ask you a couple more questions? Bring that question back. The person who's asking the questions controls the conversation. But that's the difficult thing about it, is the modern buyer is like, no, I don't want to answer any of your questions. Just give me this information that I want. But when I then stop and realize that I as a buyer am wrong in my, you know, crusade to get this information, now all of a sudden you become the person that I believe has credibility, and I'm going to have a real conversation with you rather than just treating you like, you know, some random producer, insurance agent, sales rep I don't want to deal with.
Right. Well, I love that. Is there anything else when you think about showing up and being there, being just present, whether it's with your own reps or with a potential client, that you feel like is forgotten, underutilized, or is that enough knowledge dump that we're going to keep people busy at least until 2021?
I think we give them enough, right? I think we're going to overwhelm them otherwise. I got a lot more, but I will hold it back for now. Everyone go on LinkedIn. My name is Steve, last name Richard. Connect with me on LinkedIn. And then I post these daily tips. They're usually a minute video. Sometimes it's not a video. I'm playing around with it to see what gets the most views based on the LinkedIn algorithms. And, you know, I promise you it's going to be, you know, me passing on knowledge. Almost everything you're going to learn from me has nothing to do with anything I created. It's all basically things I've learned along the way. Sometimes I form the label like 3x3 research, but other than that, I'm just sort of passing along what I've learned that's been working.
I'm going to second that, guys. I think there's a lot of confirmation bias that happens in our industry of, oh, I've done this well, I've done that well. There's good, better, and then there's best. And what we need to look at is best practices. And then we need to keep ourselves on the cutting edge by readdressing whether we've fallen into some bad habits every so often. And the best way to do that is to follow people that just keep your curiosity going, make you think about it daily with some small tip, and that you reflect. Like Steve said, it's a minute-long video at most. You spend 5 minutes thinking about it after. If it comes back to mind at lunchtime or as you're cooking a steak up for dinner, you're still making a lot of progress, and there's going to be something that sticks and means a lot to you. So yeah, I'm going to second that. Go follow Steve on LinkedIn. I'll put his LinkedIn profile in here too. I'm going to put that trade show article there again, just to prove that I'm not a loon and somebody else told me this was a great idea. And we'll go from there.
Yeah,
So,
it's a real pleasure. To quote my friend Art Sopcich, sales is a school that you never graduate from. So I've seen people who are in their 80s. I mean, literally, when I've done sales training programs in my past careers, I've seen people in their 80s that are just absorbing knowledge, and people in their 20s that think they know it all. And you look at lifetime earnings, and I guarantee you that there's a correlation there. So just continue to study, learn, and improve. Yep.
I have found the highest compliment so far is when I get to the last day of a trade show and I've had breakfast, I've had lunch, and I've been at the booth, and someone comes up and they said, Kat, I had lunch with you yesterday. What is it that you do? And you've suddenly earned the right to ask them all the questions and to pitch them, but they have so much confidence in the fact that you've just cared about them and gave a shit for 3 days. Granted, it's not always a fun 3 days. There's some days that my ankles hurt from wearing heels, but that authenticity does pay off. And, you know, insurance agents are serving their local community, so it certainly pays off. So
what a great story. I love it. Love it.
Thank you for being here, Steve. Appreciate it, guys. Tune in just about every month. We have a guest on The Rules Still Apply. Thank you.